So I'd now like to introduce our second speaker, Professor Catherine Neish. Dr. Neish is a professor in the Department of Earth Sciences and will be presenting us today a talk entitled The Dragonfly Project, a Rotorcraft Lander on Titan. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Catherine Neish.
So I'm very happy to talk to you today about Dragonfly, which is a mission I never thought would happen. But I'm so pleased to say that it was selected for funding last summer by NASA to explore Saturn's moon Titan and its potential for prebiotic chemistry. So Jan's introduction was a great one. It really showed where you might begin to look for life in the universe. And one of those places that I think is perhaps one of the best places to look for life in our solar system is Titan. And so what you see here is our spacecraft landing on Titan in one of the many sand dunes we find there, and then taking some data and flying off again. It is a Rotorcraft Lander. So unlike Mars, where we send rovers with wheels, on Titan, it has a thick atmosphere. And so in fact, flying around is the best way to get places. This is a mission that's being run by the Johns Hopkins University Applied Physics Lab by my friend, Dr. Zibby Turtle, and I am operating on the mission as a co-investigator. So this is my favorite place in the solar system. And while you might be distracted by the beautiful image of Saturn in the background with a shadow of its rings there on the southern hemisphere, the place that has really caught my attention is Titan, which is this sort of nondescript orange blob in front of Saturn here. It is Saturn's largest moon. It is actually the second largest moon in the solar system after Ganymede, which is Jupiter's moon, and larger than the planet Mercury. So if it didn't orbit Saturn, we would almost certainly call it a planet. There have been two spacecraft that have visited Titan. The first was a year before I was born. Voyager 1 got its first close look at Titan. Unfortunately, we knew so little about Titan that it wasn't able to image its surface. It just discovered that it was this orange hazy moon with some interesting chemistry in its atmosphere. So when it came time to plan the next mission, which was the Cassini-Huygens mission, we knew which instruments to put on board in order to better study the surface of Titan. Cassini got to Saturn in 2004. It dropped the Huygens probe, which you can see here on the side, in January of 2005, which provided our best high-resolution images of the surface of Titan. And then it crashed into Saturn on purpose in 2017 at the end of its mission. So we've been missing Cassini now for about 3 years. But Cassini taught us a lot about Saturn and its moons, including Titan, which you see here. This is an image from Voyager. As I said at the time, Titan just appeared to us as this orange nondescript blob. And we did learn a lot about its atmosphere, but in terms about its surface processes, that really took Cassini in order to explain those processes. So we went from a world like this, and then in 2004, it became a world that looked like a world. It's a fantastic surface. This is an image taken by Cassini's visual and infrared mapping spectrometer. You can see in brown here near the equator, these huge sand seas that just wrap around Titan's equator. This here is one of the fresher impact craters on Titan. It's named Synlap. The blue areas we think are enriched in water ice. So Titan is an icy moon, but you don't actually see a lot of ice on its surface because it's covered in organics, and I'll get to that in a little bit. And then these brighter areas in the mid-latitudes, we don't actually know what they are. I personally think there's some sort of mix of ice and organics. And then at the poles, which you can't see here, we actually discovered huge lakes of liquid hydrocarbons, ethane and methane. So let's take a look at some of these features in a bit more detail. So one of the things Cassini discovered is that Titan has storms. So these white patches you see here are clouds wrapping around its equator. And in fact, with these clouds, what we noticed is before they showed up, that the surface was quite bright. After they moved along, it was dark, and then it brightened again. So what we think we were seeing there was rain. So methane rain darkening the surface, just like it does, just like water rain does here on Earth. What does that methane do? Well, it can actually cut streams into the landscape. This is an image taken by the Huygens probe during its descent to the surface of Titan. And if I didn't tell you this was Titan, you might think that this was an image out of an airplane window, say, traveling in southwestern United States, where we have a lot of dried out river channels on the surface. We were not necessarily expecting this. It was shocking to see how Earth-like Titan was with these early images. I mentioned these lakes, so this is the North Pole of Titan here, and you can see all these dark black or blue areas are regions where we think there are large seas and lakes of liquid methane and ethane. Some of them are quite large as the Great Lakes, so they take up a considerable portion of the north and south pole of Titan. There was an earlier mission that actually was aiming to send a boat to Ligeia Mare, which is this here on the right, this sea on the right. That was not selected, and in some ways we probably owe the fact that the Time mission, or the Titan Mare Explorer, was not selected. How do we know they're lakes? Well, this here is what we call specular reflection. So for those of you who've ever, again, looked out the side of an airplane during sunrise or sunset, you've probably seen it glint in lakes or rivers. This is when the sun and your eyeball are just perfectly aligned to get what we call a specular reflection. And so you only get these sort of these bright returns if the surface is very, very smooth. And so this proved that these lakes are in fact liquid. I mentioned the sand dunes near the equator. Here's a higher resolution view of those sand dunes. So you can see these long linear dunes here stretching out for hundreds of kilometers. Now I'm calling them sand dunes, but these are not the white sand beaches you might find on your winter vacation to Mexico. What I mean by sand is that it's the right size of particle to be picked up by the wind and blown into these dune-sized shapes, but the composition is completely different. We think the composition of the sand dunes on Titan are some sort of organic compound. We don't have a great idea of what that organic compound is, and we're hoping Dragonfly will help us understand that better, but I like to call these Titan's carcinogenic sand dunes. You would not want to go play with your sand bucket here on Titan. There is some evidence for volcanism on Titan, but it is not very common, and it's a bit weird too, because if you think of ice in your glass of water, that ice cube is going to be floating on top of the water, right? So how do you get the water up on top of that floating ice? It's not an easy thing to do. But this here is Sotra patera, which is probably one of the best examples we have of possible volcanism on Titan. We think we see this caldera here next to a mountain called Deux Monts, and then off to the north here, we think this is a lava flow. So not a lot of evidence of volcanism on Titan, but there is some. And then lastly, we see impact craters. This is Sinlap, which I showed you earlier on that VIMS map earlier in the talk. This is probably the freshest crater on Titan, but we don't actually see a lot of craters on Titan. Just like the Earth, we think that they are weathered quite quickly through erosion, through the rainfall and the wind activity that I mentioned. But what's neat about craters is, like volcanism, you can actually get liquid water on the surface of Titan. So it's not being erupted from beneath. What happens is when a comet strikes the surface, it can actually melt the surface. So when this crater was first formed, there would have been molten rock, which on Titan is water. And why is that interesting? Well, it can mix with the organics there that come from the atmosphere to create possibly biological molecules. So here's another image of Titan. You can sort of see its atmosphere here surrounding it. So what's happening in that atmosphere? Well, it's composed primarily of nitrogen and methane, about 95% nitrogen and a few percent methane. So probably the most Earth-like atmosphere in the solar system. What happens to these two molecules? Well, they interact with ultraviolet light and charged electrons coming from Saturn and coming from the sun. This splits them up into tiny little atoms. and then they recombine to form a whole bunch of interesting complex organic molecules. So we see a lot of ethane, acetylene, hydrogen cyanide, so on and so forth. But basically, if you can think of a way to attach carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen together, it is almost certainly in Titan's atmosphere. So for all your chemists, I will leave that as an exercise to the audience. You can make up your own Titan organic. But what this means is it's really a fantastic place to study prebiotic chemistry, because these are all the ingredients you need for life. So what do you need for life? This is something I cover in my astrobiology class, which is a third-year course here at Western. You need three main things. You need energy, which in Titan's case you can get from the sun or from interior processes. You need essential elements for life. So we call them schnapps in the astrobiology community. So carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, and sulfur. On Titan, though, it's unlikely that we have very much phosphorus or sulfur because there's no rocks there. There's no silicate rocks. So on Titan, I like to call it schno. You can still do quite a bit in terms of biochemistry with just these four elements. And then you need a solvent, so something for these elements to react in. On Titan, we actually have two solvents. We have these lakes I told you about, made of methane and ethane. This would be a very weird life that would be hard to detect because it would be so different than what we're used to on Earth. But as I mentioned, there's also water. So in these impact craters, after they're formed, there will be water there for tens to hundreds of years before it freezes. And this could potentially create the first steps towards life as we know it. And so this is what we want to investigate with Dragonfly. Why is this interesting? Well, so for my PhD, what I did is I took these Titan organics, which are called tholins. This was a term coined by Carl Sagan. It is from the Greek word for muddy. So you basically take nitrogen and methane, you add energy, and you create this brown gunk. I then deposited that gunk in water, and I left it there for a couple of days. And in fact, it's quite easy to make amino acids, the products of proteins. So this is, a potential way to start the first steps towards life. So I wrote this all up in my dissertation in December of 2008, which was called The Formation of Prebiotic Molecules in Liquid Water Environments on the Surface of Titan. And here I'll zoom in on the last paragraph, which said, plans for a new NASA flagship mission to Titan are currently underway. If selected, this mission will provide new insight into the processes occurring on Titan's surface. Titan has been conducting natural experiments in prebiotic chemistry for eons, and now all that remains is to collect the results. Now, after I wrote this, they very quickly realized they were not going to send a flagship mission to Titan. It is now going to Europa, which is one of Jupiter's moons, which also possibly has life under its icy surface. So I was kind of depressed. I didn't think I would ever get a chance to test this hypothesis and look for amino acids on Titan after I graduated. So I started working on other things. I'm now a lunar scientist as well as a Titan scientist and have other interests. But this was always very close to my heart, looking for life on Titan. So I was quite excited to get this email in my inbox on January 6, 2016. I had just started at Western a few months prior to that. And so I will save you from reading this whole thing. But basically, it told the planetary science community that they were going to be soliciting proposals for a new mission. And one of the targets that you could propose to visit was Titan. And this was quite a shock because this list of missions was not supposed to include Titan or Enceladus, which is another of Saturn's moons. But you don't look a gift horse in the mouth. So a team of us started working on a proposed mission to Titan to see if we could take advantage of this unique opportunity. And around this time, two of my friends and colleagues, Jason Barnes from the University of Idaho and my PhD advisor, Ralph Lorenz at Johns Hopkins University Applied Physics Laboratory, sat down and had a chat and came up with this idea of sending a drone to Titan. So in the past, people had thought about sending balloons. Jason wrote a proposal to send an airplane. But around this time, people were really starting to do a lot of good work with drones here on Earth. And so it seemed like an obvious place to start on Titan, which again is an excellent place to fly. So in 2017, we put in our proposal. It was down selected in December of that year. We wrote a second proposal. It's called Phase A in NASA terms. And then last June, it was down selected between two missions, Dragonfly and a mission to a comet, and NASA chose Dragonfly. So as of June 2019, we are an official mission. We're now in what we call Phase B. Currently, we are expected to launch in 2027. This is actually just a few weeks old. And so we don't exactly know when we're supposed to arrive because we're still figuring out the implications of this late launch, but hopefully sometime in 2036. So going to the outer solar system is quite the endeavor. You have to be in it for the long run. And if you want to see some of the pictures and videos I'm going to show today, I direct you to our webpage, which gives a lot of excellent information. So this is Zibby. She is the PI of the Dragonfly mission, one of the few women PI in NASA's history. And next to her is a scale model of Dragonfly. So you can see it's a quadcopter. It has, well, I guess an octocopter. Everything has a backup with NASA missions. So we have our 4 wings. We have our energy source here in the back. The skids that we land on, some of our cameras will be tucked in here, and this is our communications back to Earth. This is the whole Dragonfly team during Phase A. We went, APL is in Columbia, Maryland, so we all went to see them test out this scale model of Dragonfly here in front of us. So that's me down there in the front row, along with other engineers and scientists who are working on Dragonfly. Another thing you might notice is there are quite a few women who work on this team. In fact, Dragonfly has the largest percentage of women of any NASA mission ever at about 45%. So we're pretty excited about that too. So here, I'm just going to show you a quick clip that shows our drone here in action, being autonomously flown. So I turned the sound off because I heard it didn't work so well before. But you can see this field demonstration. It took off on a farmer's field and was flying around. We had a controller there, but he was just there in case anything horribly wrong happened. But it is flying autonomously, so without any joysticks involved. You just input the commands and off it goes. It flies around in a pre-programmed fashion and then landed again, and it worked perfectly. So you might think, well, it's easy to fly on Earth. It's got a thick atmosphere. What's it like on Titan? Well, in fact, it turns out Titan is easier to fly on than Earth. It has an atmospheric pressure that's about 50% greater and a density that's 4 times greater than Earth. So if anything, it's easier to fly on Titan than it is on Earth. And if you want to learn more about this, there's this fantastic article from XKCD called Interplanetary Cessna, where they try to have airplanes fly on different bodies in the solar system. But they say, when it comes to flying, Titan might be better than Earth. So you could probably get your Cessna up into the air under pedal power. That's how easy it is to fly around. So actually our models on Earth will have larger rotors than what we need to send to Titan. So I have another video. Again, I stopped the volume here, but if you'd like to check it out, you can find it on Dragonfly's website. But it just briefly goes through the science we're hoping to address with Dragonfly. So I'll try to narrate here as the movie goes on. So here's what our landing is going to look like. Dragonfly drops down under its own power, starts to fly to its first landing spot, which we've picked to be in the dunes, which should be a relatively safe place to land. So we're going to land. So what this is doing is sending neutrons into the surface, and that tells us its elemental composition. So how much carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, and so on is there. So on Titan, we think there's this hydrocarbon layer on top of the water ice, and that will help us determine that. We also have a drill that will pulverize the surface basically and suck it up into the spacecraft, where we can analyze the chemistry. And this is the real heart of the Dragonfly mission, the gas chromatograph mass spectrometer. So we collect our sample into one of our sampling tubes. You can see it collecting there. And then once we have our sample, we can put it in the instrument to analyze it. So we can get very detailed mass spectra from this. We can tell exactly which molecules are present, which is not something that Cassini or Huygens could do. So for example, we could identify a species like oleic acid by its distinct mass spectra. We'll also be able to tell things like the chirality, which is something that Dr. Kami mentioned earlier, to see if there's any evidence for life. So here they're going to show this example. There we have two chiral isotopes of the same molecule, which are mirrored examples of the same molecule. And if we find more of one than the other, that's really indicative that there might be something that was biological in nature present. We also have cameras on board to take pictures, weather station, geophones. It is quite the set of instruments we have on Dragonfly. Oops. So this is here's an earlier picture of what Dragonfly would have looked like. Here are the four instruments we have: the mass spectrometer, the neutron spectrometer, which will give us that composition of the surface. We have geophysics and meteorology, so a weather station and some subsurface information, and then a really great camera suite. I'm not going to go through each of these instruments in detail. I'll just skip through these. And I'll just leave you with this final landing sequence for Dragonfly. This is what we think it's going to look like as it enters Titan's atmosphere, hopefully in 2036. So thank you for your attention. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Catherine, for a fascinating presentation. As before, you can type your questions in the Q&A box. So I was really fascinated. First question comes in. How much would this Dragonfly drone weigh?
Oh gosh,
Roughly.
That's a good question. I'm not sure, but it's about the same size as the Mars rovers, if that gives you an idea of scale. Okay. So we had this virtual reality version of Dragonfly at APL last fall, and it was about as tall as me and maybe as long as me. So so it's human sized, sort of like the rovers on Mars.
Okay, yeah. There's another question from the chat. Why will it take until 2036 for this mission to land?
Right. So the outer solar system is really far away. That's the main reason. So it takes us 9 or 10 years to get out to Saturn, depending on when we launch. And NASA has pushed back our launch date already by 2 years now. So we were just directed to move it back to 2027. And with the launch vehicle they've given us, it would take 10 years. So we have to build the thing, which we could have done earlier, but NASA says it doesn't have the money. But that takes a few years. Then you have to launch it. Then it has to take 8, 9, 10 years to get there. So unfortunately, space is just really, really large.
Absolutely. Will the soil samples be returned to Earth for further analysis, or will everything be done on the mission?
Yes, this is not a sample return mission. Um, everything will be done on board. So these are all instruments that are on Dragonfly. All the analysis will be done on board Dragonfly, and then those results will be sent back to Earth. But Dragonfly is staying on Titan. We're not getting it back.
Perfect. How will it stay in contact with Earth from so far away?
It has a radio on it that will point at the Earth, and on Earth we have this fantastic array of antennas called the Deep Space Network. These are the telescopes that are in constant contact with all of NASA's missions out there in the solar system, and so we will just point our radio back at Earth when we're facing Earth, and talk to the Deep Space Network. This is why we're landing in the equator and not, say, near the poles, because the poles will actually be tipped away from Earth and we wouldn't be able to talk to Earth directly. So this is why we have to land near the equator.
You were talking in your presentation about how it has to be an octocopter because everything is 2-to-1 redundant for NASA. Is it better to make one expensive, really reliable vehicle, or a number of cheap but maybe not so reliable vehicles?
NASA is really risk adverse. So I think that's a good strategy too. And people are trying that now with CubeSats that are orbiting the Earth and the Moon. And NASA did do it once with the Mars rovers. So Spirit and Opportunity were two small Mars rovers that went there in 2004. They were only supposed to be one, but NASA's like, well, we might as well send two instead for double the budget. But yes, in this case, I think NASA is in general pretty risk adverse, and that's why we're going with the one really reliable spacecraft and not a lot of mini drones, which would also be pretty cool.
Perfect, thank you. Another question from the chat. What speed will the vehicle travel at to get to Saturn in about 10 years? And how does it carry enough fuel to make that happen?
Well, actually, Dragonfly is not going to carry that much fuel. Most of the Delta V we get is actually from launching out of Earth with whatever rocket we're given. And then we do a bunch of gravity assists. So I think we go around Earth and Venus and Earth again before we head out to the outer solar system. We get another little boost from Jupiter. So actually, Dragonfly is going to spend a lot of time in the inner solar system just trying to get some speed from the other planets here before it ends up going out to Saturn. These are very complicated orbital trajectories that very smart people at NASA figure out for us.
Perfect, thank you. Kathleen says, congratulations on being chosen by NASA for this adventure. And her question is, as it's a very long project, what sort of continuity or succession planning is involved in actually making a team that's going to have a mission that goes over 20, maybe 25 years?
Right. No, this was something that we definitely thought about when we were planning it. And we do have a lot of, younger folks on our mission. Our deputy PIs are both in their 40s. And our PI herself is not much older. So, it is something we thought about. But we're being very, knowledgeable to include students involved in this project. So we're getting guest investigators to come on board to learn about the mission and get up to speed. So by the time we're actually at Titan, these people will be established in their careers and be able to help with the mission. There's another program at NASA called a Participating Scientist Program. So when a mission actually gets to its target, NASA will issue money for people to participate in that mission, and anybody can apply to participate. So that's another way that we get younger folks involved over such long missions.
Perfect. We're almost out of time here. In fact, we actually are out of time here. But there's one final question, and it's a very dangerous question to ask of academics, and it's actually to both you and Yan. And it's, what other projects are you working on at this time? And so you could probably talk about that for 3 hours. Instead, maybe talk about it for a minute or two each.
Sure. Well, I mentioned after I graduated that there wasn't actually much going on with Titan in the foreseeable future. So I actually took a position to work on an instrument on the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter. At the time, I didn't know anything about the moon, but I came up to speed rather quickly, and now I am a co-investigator on, it's called the Miniature Radar on the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter. So we're studying impact craters on the moon as one other thing that I work on.
That's awesome. And Yen?
Yeah, so I have two research programs going. One is about buckyballs in space. Those are the largest molecules that we know in space. They are formed in the shape of a soccer ball, much smaller, microscopic particles. They're the largest molecules that we know, but we don't know how you make them. We don't know how they got there. We actually don't know how they actually play a role in astrophysics. And somewhat related to that, I also studied the spectral fingerprints of a whole set of molecules that we don't even know. We see their fingerprints in starlight, and we know it originates from interstellar clouds. We know they're large molecules, but we have not been able to identify them. And some of these have been described for the first time actually 100 years ago. So it's a very old problem and sometimes called an embarrassment for modern astrophysics. But hey, that's right where I fit in. So.
Perfect. So that's a huge difference in distances from the moon to interstellar clouds. So wide spectrum of research going on there. Thank you everyone for spending part of your afternoon with us. We wish we could have interacted with you in person and had a chance to chat and see you in a slightly different way. Obviously, these times don't really allow for that, but we hope in future years we'll be able to welcome you to campus in the usual way.